That right there is probably one of the best 1440p gaming PCs you can build right now in terms of value for money and sensible part choices. The only problem is you probably can't build one because there are some parts in there that you just simply cannot get your hands on unless you live in certain regions or you work for a system integrator. The CPU that I've chosen for this rig is a 7500F, and the reason is simple. I think it's the best value for money gaming CPU you can get your hands on right now. It's basically a Ryzen 7600 without integrated graphics for the price of a Intel i5 13400F, which means you get a 7600 CPU level of gaming performance, which is really top level, for the price of the previous value king of gaming CPUs, the 13400F. Basically, this is the new king of value if you're looking for gaming performance focused CPU. It's also on the AM5 platform, so it's going to have better upgrade path and future proofing compared to the Intel competitor, and it also has lower heat output, making it cheaper to cool. However, it's not quite readily available everywhere yet, with it only really being initially released to system integrators like Aftershock PC, which, disclaimer, I work for, and hence is how I got this CPU. However, with a lot of people clearly wanting this CPU in their life, it's inevitable that it will see general release to consumers and DIY PC builders basically everywhere, so just be patient. The GPU is something that you most likely won't be able to buy ever though. It's the Radeon RX 7900 GRE, a 7900 XT that has been cut down to 16 gigs of RAM, lower clock speeds, and a lower core count. At its MSRP of 650 USD, says that the 7900 GRE is looking like a pretty good deal. However, this particular card, the GRE, is probably not going to see any release anywhere else but China anytime soon, so don't worry too much about it. But enough waffling about the CPU and GPU in here that you can't buy. Let's talk about the build process to build a rig like this. Well, installing the CPU is usually the first step. You can put the motherboard on a nice mouse mat or a non-conductive wooden surface, or just the motherboard box that it came in. And it's as easy as lifting the retention arm, lifting the bracket, aligning the notches on the CPU to the notches on the socket, placing it down gently, making sure that it's in place, and then reversing the steps. The retention arm is going to go down stiff and it's going to feel like you're breaking something, but fret not, it'll be fine. By the way, the motherboard I chose is a ASRock PG B660M Lightning because it is a pretty value-oriented MATX motherboard. Perfect for a value-focused gaming rig like this. And the RAM I went with is a 16 gig kit of ADATA XPG Lenser because it has nice RGB, it's 6000 MHz, and is going to perform excellently. By the way, I definitely recommend getting MATX motherboards for a value-oriented rig, since MATX cases are easy to build in, has good amount of expandability, but tends to be more on the cheaper sides of things. Like if you're looking for the cheapest possible motherboards and cases, they tend to be MATX. Also, you shouldn't be spending too much on a really top-of-the-line motherboard if you're building a value-oriented rig, since they provide basically zero benefit in terms of real-world actual performance gains. Installing the RAM is as simple as reading your motherboard manual, finding out which slots you should use first, and then pulling back the retention tabs before aligning it, the notches appropriately, and then sliding it in. I wouldn't recommend you go more than 16 gigs on a value-oriented PC because you really don't need more than that unless you're planning to do something that is really multitasking heavy or RAM heavy. At this point in time, it's a good idea to install a CPU cooler if your CPU cooler is somewhat compact and somewhat simple to install. If you're installing a massive tower cooler or a all-in-one water cooler, which I don't recommend for a value-oriented rig, especially one using this CPU since it really doesn't output all that much heat. But if you have kind of a simple cooler, this is a good time to install it. I'm using the low-profile AXP90X53 cooler from Thermalright because it's the easiest cooler to install that I had on hand. At this point, you should also probably install your storage device if you are using a M.2 SSD, which you should because in 2023, nothing else compares. I got a 1TB Lexar SSD here. It's a good performer, gets the job done. It's as easy as slotting it in and screwing it down. After all that is done, the next step is installing the motherboard, CPU, and RAM in one unit into your PC case. Using the Meshify Compact because that is what I had on hand, but you probably shouldn't be getting a case like this if what you're looking for is value for money. It's a great case if you want longevity since excellent build quality, good looks, and brilliant airflow. But if you're someone on a tighter budget, there are a lot more value GPU-oriented brands than Fractal to look at, brands like Montech or Techware. Installing a motherboard into a case is super easy though. The standoffs are all pre-installed in this particular case, and after installing the I/O shield and sliding the motherboard in, all I had to do was screw in the motherboard screws to hold it in place. The next step will be to install the power supply. So this is as simple as removing your back panel, taking out this bracket, screwing 4 screws into your power supply bracket. Plugging in the cables that you plan to use for the rig is probably a good idea at this point, by the way, if you have some sort of semi or fully modular power supply. At this point in the process, I would generally install all the cables. So all the power supply cables, I'll cable manage them, for the front panel connectors. And these are initially going to seem pretty complicated to install at first, but they only really go in the right way. It's impossible to screw it up if you don't try to force things that shouldn't be forced. And basically every motherboard manual these days will have a clear guide on which panel connector goes where. I would also connect up all my fans and do a little bit of cable management and tidying up, because we are very close to being done with building this PC at this point. Final step, which is in my opinion my favorite, is installing the graphics card, which is the 7900 GRE I've already talked about. It's as simple as removing the 2 GPU bracket screws, removing the slot cover, pulling back the retention tab on the PCIe slot, aligning the graphics card, and then sliding it in like a present with a satisfying click. Having my GPU cables pre-managed at this point, all I had to do was screw the GPU in with the screws that I initially removed, plugged in the power cables, and there you have it. A high-end 1440p gaming beast. So yeah, that's the PC complete, and here are some performance numbers for you. As you can tell, it is a very capable 1440p gaming rig. It's very well balanced, the CPU is not bottlenecking the GPU in most games. 7900 GRE is really excellent in my opinion for 1440p gaming. It has pretty good performance per dollar, and the 16 gigs of VRAM is, in my opinion, a good thing because it allows you to turn texture quality settings all the way up to Ultra and not have any sort of performance hit, which is going to be really nice and really beneficial for better visual fidelity at high resolutions. Also, that bigger VRAM buffer is going to give you a little bit better in terms of future proofing as in-game textures get higher and higher res. Anyway, next week's video is going to be something really exciting, so subscribe.